They arrive at a white spike's nest, where the military has already accomplished to corner a female and is about to put it in a cage. Suddenly, it breaks free and starts attacking them. Muri descends down into the nest through a hole to help the men down there to get control of the situation, but fails. As Dan simultaneously sees a horde of male white spikes from the helicopter on their way to the nest, he also goes down to help out. Dan grabs one of the female's tentacles, making it angry and tricks it to shoot itself with sharp spikes. Due to that, they manage to get the upper hand and put the white spike in the cage, whereafter the helicopter takes off with the cage while Dan and Muri climb out of the nest. But as they do, more white spikes arrive, and the duo has to run to a Humvee to drive and shoot their way out using a heavy machine gun. Somehow they manage to escape, and they arrive at a beach where they get out. Muri is upset that Dan put himself in danger since she needs him alive, but Dan tells her he can't see his daughter being eaten alive. Muri then starts telling Dan what happened with their family back in the 2020s. Apparently, Dan left her and her mother. Dan interrupts and says he knows he would never do that. She then continues while becoming sad and explains they separated and then divorced, and she so much hoped he would fix their family and move back together. But then on her 16th birthday, she gets a call that he has been in an accident. At the hospital, she then saw his last heartbeat on the monitor as they pushed her aside, trying to revive him. Dan is speechless and gets disheartened. A helicopter arrives and takes them to an ocean base, all while Dan ponders about what she said. Once at the base, Dan meets Muri in her lab, who is trying to synthesize a toxin. By testing thousands of combinations, and with a little luck, they will hopefully find a toxin that kills the female by next morning. While getting closer and closer, Dan asks Muri if she has a way to deploy the toxin once she finds it. But she only answers cryptically that she has a way, but that it doesn't matter if they don't get a toxin that works. Dan has 21 hours left before he is sent back. He asks if she wants any help, to which she responds it's a one-person job. He tells her that Emmy would be proud of her if she saw her, just like he is, after which he leaves. The morning arrives and Dan comes back to the lab. He knows he's there for a reason and asks Muri again what his purpose is. Finally, she starts to explain. They are living on borrowed time, and since they have no resources left, she needs Dan to take the toxin back to his time to mass-produce it. That way they will stop the war from ever occurring. As she has just finished talking, the computer tells them that the current test is a 100% bond, meaning they have found the toxin. Seconds later, the female white spike awakens and makes a loud call. Suddenly, the base is breached by white spikes, and Dan and Muri grab guns to make a run for the helicopter pad. On their way there, the duo gets cornered by several white spikes, and they have to shoot their way out. But as they continue running, Muri is hit by a spike, and so Dan has to help her walk. Simultaneously, an automated voice tells them through the facility's speakers that it's 3 minutes left until time jumpers will be sent back. Muri falls down in pain and is bleeding heavily, telling Dan she can't walk and that he should leave her, but he won't. She says she is sorry and that she's glad to have seen him like this, like when she was young. Dan gets despaired and saddened and sees there's less than a minute until he is sent back. As Muri hands him the vial with the toxin, a white spike appears and tries to attack them. But the floor suddenly fails, and the white spike and Muri start sliding towards the edge. Dan jumps and catches her, but his grip slides and she falls. In full desperation, Dan leaps after her, but is teleported back in the middle of his jump. He wakes up in 2022, holding the vial containing the toxin firmly in his hand, and tells Lieutenant Hart, who is there, that they must mass-produce the toxin and send it back. She informs him, however, that the portal in the future is down, and no one can get back. He sees Charlie beside him, who made it too. As he gets home, he embraces little Muri, who meets him. That night, Dan explains to Emmy that he met Muri in the future, and that they made the toxin together. He also tells her that no one knew where the white spikes came from. They were just there in the year 2048. When his wife then suggests the aliens could have landed years earlier, a light bulb goes on in Dan's head. Next, Dan visits Dorian in a bar, who also made it. He agrees on helping Dan find a solution to stop the war from ever happening, and to find out when the white spikes arrived. They take the white spike claw that Dorian has around his neck and go to see Charlie, who analyzes the claw and sees it has volcanic ash on it, but from China, not from Russia. Dan can't understand how volcanic ash from China ends up in Russia, and Charlie asks him if he knows of any volcano expert, which he does. They end up in Dan's biology classroom, where the trio asks Martin how a creature from Russia can end up having ash from China under its claws. Martin then explains it has to be from the Millennium eruption 1,000 years ago, because you can still find ash from that eruption deep inside the ice in northern Russia. The team then realize the white spikes must have arrived back then and become frozen deep inside the ice, and as they make a simulation on how the ice melts in Russia, all ice is gone by 2048. After their discovery, they ask the U.S. Air Force to fund a covert mission into Russia, which they won't do. So instead, Dan goes and asks his father James to fly them there, telling him he needs his help, to which James immediately agrees. They load a plane, and Lieutenant Hart joins them after having brought as much newly produced toxins as she could. Once in northern Russia, at the likely location they pinpointed the white spikes to be, they drive around on snowmobiles. Suddenly, they experience some type of interference and can neither use their instruments nor the compass. They detonate the ice and walk into a crack that is revealed. Eventually, they stumble upon a large vessel stuck in the ice. They open a hole with a metal saw, and Dan tells James and Charlie, who stay outside, to shoot anything that comes out. They enter and find the cockpit, where they see an alien race that are not white spikes. They continue and eventually find a compartment with several white spikes in it, figuring that white spikes are cargo. As they inject some of them with the toxin that kills them, the other white spikes start awakening, and before they manage to inject them too, several of them break free and start going for the exit. Dan informs Charlie and James to be ready, who manages to stop 3 of them as they come out, but a 4th manages to escape. The team inside the ship picks up C4 explosives to blow the ship up if they have to. While giving Dan his white spike claw, Dorian then tells Dan to save his daughter and get out to track down the one that escaped. While Dan is running back to the snowmobiles, the others inside find a whole colony of white spikes that are waking up and starting to attack. The whole team inside sacrifices themselves, and Dorian yells out just before he detonates all the C4 that, if he is going to die, he's going to die his own way. The ship explodes and kills all white spikes in it. Dan makes it back to James and Charlie, and James tells him that the one that escaped is a big one. Dan says that's a female, which they definitely have to stop. He and his father then jump on 2 snowmobiles and start tracking its footprints in the snow. They split up, and shortly after, Dan sees the white spike start running toward his father to attack him. However, James has managed to make a trap, so the white spike bites a dummy, and James starts shooting it from a distance. This time, however, the white spike really starts going for him, but Dan manages to hit it with his snowmobile just before it manages to reach James. The 2 then shoot at it, making it retreat backwards so that it falls off an edge. They figure that it isn't dead, and they are right. Suddenly, the white spike appears from nowhere and hits them. It shoots Dan in his leg and goes for him, and both Dan and James manage to take out its eyes as it gets close. Dan injects the toxin into its arm and thinks it's over. But the white spike bites its arm off, stopping the toxin's effect. It tries to go after Dan, but James cuts his hand to save his son, making the white spike go after the smell of his blood instead. James, who doesn't want to lose his father, then jumps up on it and stabs it with Dorian's claw. Finally, he picks up another dose of the toxin and injects it in the white spike's mouth and kicks it off a ledge, killing it once and for all. They lay down on the snow in exhaustion, and Charlie joins them. Dan comes home and gives his family a big hug, after which he introduces Muri to her grandfather. All the while, we hear Dan's voice saying he will never leave this family.